All right. Hello, everybody. It's been a while since we've been on the Stoa. In preparation for this, I was kind of feeling nostalgic, and I went and watched our first Stoa session, the Sutra to Tantra, which was like almost exactly 3 years ago. And I was kind of, it was kind of surreal. I was like, oh my God, it's been forever. We've come so far. I was just such a fresh-faced young baby, that didn't know anything about Vajrayana, and now I've been through the trenches or something like that. But for those who don't know, so I think this is the seventh. It's number 6, but we're calling it 7 because the first one we labeled as number 0. This is the 7th in our series of introductory sessions on evolving ground, and contemporary Vajrayana broadly, I guess. Those are all available on the Stoa channel if you want to poke in, find the playlist. It's also available at evolvingground.org in the resources section. And the interesting thing is, there's always this cliche phrase of starting where we began, and that was the thing that I really stood out when I was watching that first video. Is the reason that we started Evolving Ground was because Charlie and I had this unique experience of becoming friends, and then me starting to see Charlie as a mentor or a coach, and then we became business partners when we co-founded this community. And our relationship in general just really seems to defy rigid definition, and a lot of that, a big part of that, is the way that I've been introduced to Vajrayana in a very informal, kind of natural way. And putting language around that has been kind of a perennial problem since the beginning, or not, maybe not problem, but challenge. We didn't want to make it overly rigid. We didn't want to make it, super ripe for misunderstanding or reification or something like that. And so I guess it's taken 3 years now for us to find some language and framing that we actually feel really confident about talking, to talk about what this thing we call the learning relationship is. And really a lot of that seems to be largely focused on the creating the possibility and likelihood of sudden transformation with coaches and coachees and peers and all of the above. So with all of that context being laid, I think I'm going to hand it over to Charlie and David. And oh yes, I guess I would be bereft to not mention that David is joining us for this last one. David Chapman, I'm sure many of you know, internet famous in our little worlds. So yeah, we're going to talk about how this transformation happens, talk a bit about how it happens in a traditional context, maybe a little bit about how it happens in secular contexts as well, so broadly, but maybe starting off with what kind of transformation are we talking about?
Thanks, Jared. Wonderful introduction. I'm just thinking about how to start and what is a good way to introduce this whole idea of spontaneous transformation and facilitating spontaneous transformation as well, because that is what we mean when we're talking about the highest potential for the learning relationship, I think. So there are many different sorts of transformation. There's gradual transformation, there's insight, and then being able to take that insight into everyday circumstances. And what we've been looking at is, and creating, I think, in Evolving Ground, is the circumstances in which it's possible to facilitate sudden, instantaneous, different state, different understanding of, oh, whoa, what just happened? Somehow something changed, and my understanding of how things are and my possibilities for being different in the world have suddenly opened out, are different. So that is the thing that we are about. Like, if we think about Evolving Ground, the reason for our existence, yeah, we're a community of practice, and the whole point in having that community of practice available is to facilitate transformation. So I remember a conversation with you, Jared, that we had really early on, where we were talking about, what is it? What is that? What is it that happens when suddenly something is different? Or when you have the circumstances are there and it's electric. It's like, yes, everyone's in flow. We're in a group situation, or we're in a very small in-person situation, and something happens, something changes. And so really what we're talking about today is like, there are lots of different possibilities. There's peer relationship, there's learning through Sangha, there is information giving, there's teacher classroom kind of situation, there's collective exploring, but something happens at a certain point, and boom, there's a different atmosphere, and there's a possibility for understanding things in another way. And then I think the question is, how is it possible to take that into all kinds of circumstances, not be reliant on the community as sandbox, not be reliant on the teacher-student relationship being right there in the moment to have that kind of experience. So you and I, and David and I, over the years, have talked a lot about what is it that creates that possibility and makes it possible to take that outside of the relationship, so that there's not this absolute reliance in time, in circumstances. Is that making some kind of sense as a good place to start off?
Looking at the gallery, nod head, no, yeah.
David and I wrote a piece recently that we've put up on vividness and on Vajrayana now, which is about all of the different forms of learning relationship. We like that phrase, learning relationship. Maybe you want to say something about our thinking around that.
Yeah. Charlie and I have been discussing this for pretty much as long as we've known each other, 20 years.
25 years.
We both were deeply involved in traditional Vajrayana, and we saw enormous possibility that was not accessible to very many people as a consequence of reliance on cultural forms that we actually basically enjoyed and were okay with, but that are not actually functional for most people in the world now. And so for 20 years, we were thinking about how can the essential aspects of Vajrayana be presented in a way that is concordant with current culture and social norms that will speak to people. And I had a series of websites over the years, which I eventually consolidated into vividness.live, which were trying to work through my thinking about this. And I eventually abandoned that because the sticking point is that for Vajrayana, there is an absolute necessity for a lama, which is just the translation of guru in Tibetan. The role of the guru, the lama, is absolutely critical, and yet that doesn't seem to be really a functional form for now and here. And I couldn't see how to overcome that, and gave up on it. And then, to my surprise, Charlie and
I got talking with Jared, and we started having those conversations again.
Yeah. And so I haven't been much involved because I've got very busy with other things at the same time. I wish that I was more involved, but it's really exciting to me to see the way that things we were, had been talking about for a couple of decades have been actualized. There is now a community of several hundred people who are being reached by a style of Vajrayana that is new, and that seems to work. And it's been sort of unclear to me over the past 3 years that you've been doing this, what the nature of the teaching and learning relationship is. And I think that has gradually come into focus for the two of you over the past little while, and got to the point where it's feasible to write it up and explain it publicly.
I'm thinking about some of the key aspects of that. So we're talking about learning relationships in different contexts as well. We have learning relationships in different gatherings in Evolving Ground, and quite intentionally, quite specifically, have different group methods that we've been trying and sandboxing. And then we have one-on-one relationships that are outside and connected to those group methods. And one of the key principles that we're bringing across the board there is this emphasis on personal autonomy. And you would not get that in a traditional setting. And yet the way that we conceive it is that it is absolutely crucial that in order to have some form of receptive presence in a relationship, any sort of learning relationship, you also have to have personal autonomy. Those two things cannot, it's not going to work if you only aim for one of those and not the other. So we're perceiving this as being a kind of emptiness form, spaciousness form relationship. And personal autonomy is one of the fundamental, like the base aspects of Evolving Ground's journey, if you like. It's one of the main waypoints on the way. So we have this, if you like, this kind of crucible or training environment for receptive presence. What's the middle one? Somebody remind me. Oh, ethical maturity. That's what it is. Receptive presence, ethical maturity, personal autonomy, and these three work together to provide some kind of a safety net. That's pretty important as well in learning relationships. We'll talk a lot more about why and the way that different kinds of relationships cannot work so well later.
As you guys were speaking, I think I was just reflecting on how strange it's been for me, because Charlie, you and I started talking to each other and becoming familiar, and you're introducing me to this whole world of Vajrayana, and I'm kind of like, oh yeah, this is making a lot of sense. And then after we started Evolving Ground, I been learning a lot more about how things operate in a traditional context or in more of the status quo environments, and slowly coming to that realization of how different it is that what we're doing is, because I just kind of assumed, I was like, oh yeah, well this seems natural, this has got to be the way it always works, right? And so but yeah, a lot of the early on, I probably just didn't even think it was that important. I was like, oh yeah, well, this is just how you learn. And yet, I think one of the things that we've kind of tried to struggle with is like that emphasis on being natural and not contrived, not having the relationship fit into a very specific category. It seems like the one of the key points for me, and I think something that's really common is that people's a way that like kind of blocks a lot of the potential for that transformation to unfold is thinking that it has to manifest, the learning relationship has to manifest in a very specific way.
Yeah, in a particular way. And there are these various models that different groups will try to emulate. You have a particular model in traditional Vajrayana, you have a very different model in consensus, what David has called consensus, Western consensus Buddhism. So you get the collective Sangha idea. That's one model, that everybody is equal, this kind of egalitarian model. Everybody will learn from each other equally. You have the teacher classroom kind of model, which is different again. It's, one person who has the expertise, the authority in a context, and then you have a classroom group, and that person is somehow conveying information. And then a different corner, you have the guru disciple, guru devotee relationship. Very different again. And all of these are oriented around an axis of power. Maybe that's one way of thinking about those. You want to say something about now you something say.
Now I have something to say. Well, let me see if I can articulate a point you made earlier and see if I've got it right. You were speaking about receptive presence and personal autonomy, and what the function of those is in transmission, which is the distinctive feature here, I think. So in relationship with the so we haven't yet mentioned the word coach here. There's an analogy between a traditional Tibetan form, which is a Dzogchen Lama, which is not the typical form of Vajrayana teacher-student relationship. That Dzogchen Lama form is interestingly similar to the coaching form in the West. And I think you have taken that and run with it. And in relationship to a Vajrayana coach, what is the essential mode of the student is this pairing in which the student is open to the coaching, but is taking responsibility for the way that they receive it, and for then applying it outside that situation. And those are inseparable, because you can't actually be intelligently processing what the coach is doing unless you have that personal autonomy. If you're just sort of having a, I'll lie back and you do me kind of attitude, then you're not really engaging with it. You're just being passive. And that is more, when you get a dysfunctional cult organized around a guru, that is the mode of the cultees, and it's sort of the mode of the tantric teacher-student relationship, as opposed to the Dzogchen.
Glad you like it. I'm glad you like it.
There are a number of different modes in a traditional context, and it's not that any of them either are inherently wrong. It's that they have risks associated, and it's very easy for each of those modes to
go wrong
just go off into a particular kind of fixed dynamic. And one of the things that Jared and I were talking a lot about was not having this sense of reified, fixed. The student is in this kind of mode, the teacher is in this sort of mode, and having those sort of very fixed roles is much more fluidity. And I think the coaching relationship allows for that, in that, yes, there's receptive presence with personal autonomy. That is true for the coach as well. Like, it's so important, and yet those roles are not the same, and they're not seen to be the same either. So that is quite different from the various modes that are usually available.
Seems like we've covered quite a bit and drawn a broad container here. I'm wondering maybe if we could take a moment and see, anybody have any burning questions that are coming up, or things that just haven't made any sense, or wanting to get some more specific details on some of the stuff that we've been throwing out.
How open-ended will be like the relationship of spiritual relationship between the coach and the mentee? Because it's like there are so many spiritual paths, and I guess this is like Vajrayana specifically, but I wonder if it could be like something way more open-ended like that, like it's a coach for many different sports, so to speak. Would that be doable?
You mean way more open-ended than Vajrayana? So having many different spiritual lineages possible?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, like, or maybe like drawing from several different ones. I don't know. Yeah, something like that.
You would have to have somebody who has expertise in all of those areas. And we do have, in Evolving Ground, there are people involved. There are some apprentices who have a hell of a lot more knowledge in different traditions than I do. And so they bring that expertise to the community, and some people regard them as a mentor, or as somebody that they learn from in that respect. But I'm not going to draw from Hindu Tantra because I don't have 20 years experience in Hindu Tantra. Now, I do have experience in some psychotherapy and some psychology lineages, and I'm very, very interested in Keegan stage framework, and I have training in Gestalt psychotherapy as well. So there are ways in which I can draw on psychological lineages and bring those to bear and think, what is the same here, what is different here, how do we bring these different histories that we're inheriting in contemporary society together. But there's also this mode of it's very easy to read a couple of books and just think that, oh yeah, I know what that thing is. I can draw on that and bring on that. And it's good to explore different lineages, and especially lineages of ideas that we're working with in the same kind of ballpark, but I wouldn't pretend that I have that kind of experience. So having said that, if you go in the EG Discord, it is absolutely full of a lot of cross lineage, cross spiritual lineage, cross Western philosophical lineage discussions. So there is this sense of the ground there being drawing on a lot of different expertise and interest, for sure. You know, just looking at the chat here. Andrew, do you want to say something, speak to what you're putting in the chat there, Andrew?
Yeah, so I would love to hear you talk broadly about your ideas of scaling these kinds of relationships, and particularly a community, like beyond just yourself or beyond, I guess, key individuals. And I think cults have a solution, which ends up being like fairly absolute. And I know that that's not your take. And so what's the thing that, or the framework when you think about impacting thousands of people, you know, which is still a small group overall?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I'm interested to hear what you think about that as well. I mean, I've thought a lot about it, and we've talked a lot about, you know, at what point would we want to scale, and what would be possible to scale and what is not possible to scale. I don't think that you can scale very personal, intimate relationship in a coaching sense, but you know, you look at some very successful Western coaches, and there is something that they're scaling as well. And one of the things we're going to bring into place is that the fundamentals journey that we're in the second year of now in EG, that will become more like an automated journey with support groups, with different, you know, an experiential journey through the 9 different nodes, waypoints, and lots of practice, lots of practical exercises, case studies, group involvement, and possibilities for mentors and that kind of thing. But yeah, that's one way that we're thinking of scaling. Do you have thoughts? I mean, we were talking about theatre recently, weren't we? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think one answer probably, I'm speaking somewhat as an outsider here. I would love to be more involved with EG than I am. I have other responsibilities. So, but I think the answer might be, you know, check back in 3 years. You know, EG is growing rapidly, but exactly how that's going to play out is going to have to be partly an improvisation. There's maybe an exoteric scaling and an esoteric scaling. The exoteric is pretty easy. As Charlie said, there's courses that have had one run through or doing their current one run through that eventually can be systematized and made available to vastly more people, should vastly more people want them. The individual coaching relationship, which is also critical as you move further into deeper practice and involvement, that is something that inherently can't scale. Although I don't know. You can have a presentation to larger groups in which you work one-on-one with somebody live. I have seen that done very effectively. And then everybody sees how that is, and they can have a vicarious experience of transformation by.
Yeah, I think that's like Tony Robbins' whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's huge dangers in that sort of thing, and it can be very fake and exploitative and so on. But there is a mode there that is potentially available if treated carefully. Whether Charlie wants to sell out stadiums, I don't know. That's
It's too easy to do that kind of thing. What
yeah,
do
it
you
is.
think, Andrew?
I hadn't thought about this, but I'm thinking right now about this like almost like masterclass sort of thing. So in like stringed instruments, it's common to have a very good instructor and a student go up and basically have a public lesson, and they mess up, and through watching the learning experience, it almost like teases out this like meta learning that people can assimilate by seeing multiple people. So even though I played cello, was very it's non-cognitive, or it's not like factual knowledge of how to play well. So seeing the learning process is actually incredibly helpful in a way that, kind of scales. I've been in like masterclass sessions with dozens of people watching, and everyone's going through something similar. So I hadn't thought about that, but like I think that's kind of a cool model that could work on some of these things that are less I guess the epistemics is less something that you might read in a textbook or something like that.
Yeah. Thinking like recently in some of our courses, I've started bringing video clips from one-on-one sessions, and those have been incredibly valuable for.
Yeah, I've liked that. Yeah.
Another thing I was gonna say, add one thing, Charlie, too. I think this is a bit more mid to long term, and I still feel like EG is so new in so many ways. But I think one of the measures of success is like the fruit of evolving ground should be the possibility of more coaches arising as well, and so that would mean, at the same time of making sure that the coaching that is happening is being shown and in a way that's accessible to a broader amount of people, which feels like one of the biggest challenges right now of us figuring out how to do that delivery mechanism, and the type of format and language and everything like that we're doing. Eventually there will be a new transition where the coaches are replicating, I guess, would be a measure of success.
Yeah, Marie has been a coach, mentor with Evolving Ground for years now, and thank you, Marie. And Ari is a mentor.
Wait, hold on. I deny that.
All right. You're a buddy. Ari's a buddy in EG, and we have the buddy system for people coming in who want to chat and draw on other people's experience as well.
Just one thing. Yeah, I was going to say, there's kind of for me, there's an idea of sort of subject matter expert, like, so I know you sometimes will refer someone to me who you think might benefit from particular somatic work that I do, but I'm probably not the best mentor for, like, the fine language that we use in the sitting practices, the opening awareness practice. So
that's a very good point.
I mean, something to mention here that I think is important, which is the obstacle, maybe the obstacle to scaling. Marie, you and I have known each other for probably 30 years now, pretty nearly. And you've been practicing intensively for much of that time. Charlie has done years of solitary retreat. Both of you can draw on that depth of practice experience. You probably, I mean, maybe you don't need 20 years of solid practice experience to be an effective coach, but it's not feasible to give transmission with, having been around for a couple of years and read some books. There's a level of personal practice experience that is irreplaceable, I think.
I want to take this back to Carlos, your question earlier. I feel I didn't answer that very well, and there's a connection here as well in relation to what we're doing with meta-systematicity. It's an odd connection, but one of the differences in how we are facilitating, let's call it facilitating transformation, is in a highly traditional context, and I think in a Western traditional as well as an Eastern traditional context, you have a very particular system that people are trained into. You're learning chemistry, or you're learning a particular Vajrayana system, and you can have a meta-systematic view whilst doing that, but there are very few circumstances in which individuals are facilitated in their own meta-systematic exploration. That is something quite new, I think. It's something that's only, even in terms of the history of humanity, is very recently available at all. So I think we're doing something different in that yes, there's a possibility for personal transmission. I want to pick up on that word that David is using quite a lot here, and we can go into what does that even mean. It's a very specific term, but so there's a facilitation of personal transformation, and at the same time there is this, how do we make it possible? How do we facilitate transformation which is orchestrated in the personal relationship to different practices and different methods? So, for example, in a highly traditional context, you're going to have maybe a meta-systematic view, and people will all be following the same path. That is standard, right? That is not the nature of what we're doing in Evolving Ground. There's a path available and nodes available, but people may be, people will have teachers outside of Evolving Ground, and do have. There are many, many different practices that people are involved with and bringing. So we're facilitating individual journeys that don't look the same. Whereas traditional Vajrayana, the journey looks the same. Traditional Western learning situations, the journey looks the same. So I think that is something different that we're doing. And there is this question, how do we scale that? Which is related to the conversation next that we had with Andrew just now. Are you okay? Should we swap places and go into
I need to find my
something?
Zafu, which
Yeah,
is
it's there.
I'll be back in a minute
Okay.
once I found it.
What else have we got here? So let's take a look at this word transmission then. So I relate the word transmission to communities of practice. And communities of practice have existed since humanity has existed. They are ways in which understanding, like practical, embodied learning, is transmitted, is taken from one generation to another generation. And transmission is, it's something that occurs through relationship in practice. So it has been taken in a highly traditional spiritual context to have lots of different meanings. That is what occurs. You know, learning occurs in embodied learning, situated learning occurs, and it can feel or seem a little bit mysterious at the time. And then all sorts of stories are built up around what that is, about what happens. And there are these different quite maybe magical or quite mysterious explanations for what goes on. And then that gets reified, that gets turned into, oh, it happens like this. And it becomes theatrical or highly energetic as well. There's a energetic mode of transmission that occurs that works, but isn't necessary, not necessary as well.
I think we discussed this in the piece that we co-wrote and published a few days ago. There's the traditional form in Tantra of transmission, which goes back to India in the 700s or so, which is called Wang in Tibetan, which is a ritual which is supposed to magically bring about enlightenment of the student through the metaphysical power of the Lama. That magical worldview is not necessarily so credible for everyone nowadays. There is a very important experience that can occur in that framework. However, it is one that uses a theatrical form and the personal charisma of the Lama, and a lot of sort of shamanic techniques for bringing about an altered state in the student, which powers through the student's unenlightenment so that the natural enlightenment that everybody always has underneath, that is revealed to the student in the form of this ritual. And that is fantastic, but it is kind of a very fixed form, and it has a variety of limitations and potential dangers to it. So this is one in the piece we wrote. We set this up in some ways as a foil to the Dzogchen mode of transmission, which is much more like a coaching relationship. And it's not in any way that the Tantric Wang is bad. It just seems like it's not the mode that is most appropriate for current circumstances for most people.
I want to pick up on some of the language that you're using there, because even to me now, that sounds really quite traditional. It sounds like, we're talking about enlightenment and unenlightenment. And, there's a part of me that just cringes even at the use of those words. And
I'm careless here.
No. It's the, those words are absolutely par for the course in
traditional, right.
Vajrayana. And they have.
I'm 3 years behind you here now.
You see, this terminology it's good and useful to understand what that means when it's actually alive, when there's some kind of electric atmosphere in the room. There's an aliveness that comes from that theatricality. It has a certain kind of function It functions to, you know, to knock people out of this very ordinary, usual, habitual way of being into something that's electric and different. And in that moment, in that space, something else becomes possible, something different in terms of a way of being that is alive and beautiful and compassionate and connected, like relationally highly connected and vivid, absolutely vivid. You know, it's an altered experience. And that is the function of those theatrical, tantric, staged experiences. And it's the function of the different roles there as well, but it's become kind of ossified. I was looking at videos recently of chud practice because I have this charnel ground course happening tomorrow. I want to show some videos. It's like looking at the videos of people engaged in the, you know, big group practice. They look fucking bored out of their minds. I mean, it's just like, it's gross. It's just like, it's like lobotomized. So the function has kind of been lost and the language has been retained. So now you have a language that is relating to a kind of lobotomized zombie, you know, going through the motions year after year after year, same again. Now, it's not that that can't be potent for some people who are engaging in a sincere, honest way, but it's very difficult for people now to access that, to actually understand how that can function. It's kind of moved away from current contemporary cultural circumstances so much that it's just very, very difficult to access the intention there. I saw something here in the chat. Charlie might also suggest, Rory, the general goals or results may not be the same. Yeah, well, context is everything, right? Context is everything. And I'm sure, where's Rory? I'm sure you would wholly agree with that. What is the goal in a particular context, or what is the potential outcome in a particular context? The gradual, the opportunities for gradual, different, differentiated, progressive change are always available. They're always available. And so you may have, so say, for example, we have Evolving Ground pupil lab, and we are discussing existential dread. So I'm drawing on recent experience. We're discussing, like, what do you do with overwhelm? How do you work skillfully, and what do you actually do in a circumstance where you're experiencing like awful overwhelm? And then we have possibilities for working with that, possibilities for practice when that arises. Well, that is going to be a very localized, contextual goal or possible outcome. And at the same time, it is possible in any circumstance to have this opportunity for spontaneous, radical, extraordinary, different way of experiencing. And that, yeah, in the traditional context, you might call that sudden rigpa, sudden enlightenment, sudden nepa, whatever it is. But yes, there are, so these two, I think, are always held together. The possibility for a localized, very specific understanding, like insight, or oh, I could do that. Oh, I could relate to circumstances in a different way. Different choices become available. And it is, we are holding that within the container that spontaneous, in traditional terminology, you would say spontaneous enlightenment. is possible. And yeah, that's a bit, that term has just come to be kind of overloaded with meaning. So I prefer not to use that these days. But Rory, are you there?
Yeah, I just want, my comment was in reply to a question that David Leonard had posed. So you might be able to, I like what you responded to there, but maybe his particular question was different.
Oh, I didn't pick up on that. Thank you. There's the underlying. I'll read it out. David, are you okay with me reading out your question here?
Please, yeah, go ahead.
So David says, there's the underlying assumption that each individual can in fact find a way, unfold, develop along a path that's bespoke to them, yet still suitable towards general goals or results of Vajrayana. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, this reminds me, I have this metaphor that I bring up a lot that I think kind of speaks to this in some way, of characterizing what happens when somebody pops into the evolving ground community. And the reality is that we have this vast multicultural contemporary territory. Everybody has is somewhere on that in that territory. Maybe some people are in the mountains, other people are in the marshlands, and they're radically different. And the skill sets that they have are different as well. So those three aspects that Charlie said, ethical maturity, personal autonomy, and receptive presence, we kind of characterize this as like a base camp. That when you come into evolving ground, we're going to navigate toward this base camp because it creates this foundation for practice afterwards. And everybody's journey to the base camp is radically different, right? Some people are going to have to learn how to swim because they've never been around lakes. Other people are going to learn how to climb because they've never been in the mountains, and they might choose to go different ways. And they're going to find friends along the way and compare skills. And so, yeah, there is this, huge plurality of skills and backgrounds and competencies and everything. And then once you get to that base camp, you've kind of established a set of tools, and then again, you're back into this radically individualized space. It's like, okay, well, now what do I want to do now that I have these skills? Do I want to climb mountains? Do I want to go to the local town and start a business? Everything's on the docket in some sense. So I don't know. This is my I won't go too much further because I can really torture a metaphor, but this one works really well for me at kind of characterizing the way the path looks from our perspective in evolving ground.
Thank you. Yeah, that really lands for me. And I feel you. I'm also tend to go a little far with my mixed metaphors and such, so don't worry about it.
This could be a good time to open up to questions, conversation.
There's a question here from Max.
Do you want to go with that? Go with that.
Yeah, so Max asks, maybe harking back to something that I said earlier, that currently EG relies on people with decades of experience. And that's rare and much more difficult for people here and now than maybe it was in India or Tibet 1,000 years ago. I do think that is a limitation. I think it may be that practice can be accelerated to some degree. I also think it's not as rare or difficult for people to be able to take chunks of time out. We know quite a few people who have been able to take a year out of their lives. It depends a lot on the responsibilities you have. It's not something that is feasible for me now, for example. And in fact, it's not feasible for me to be involved with EG or to practice much, but that's, I think it's irreplaceable though. You know, there is no substitute for years spent sitting, meditating, doing the practices, working out what their implications are for your life.
I think this relates to the kind of principles that we're drawing on Evolving Ground as well. There are many different Vajrayanas, and there's a monasticized, there's an institutionalized Vajrayana, same with different spiritual traditions, and we're drawing primarily on the principle of of yogic practice and village practice. And the nature of that is that it's constantly integrated. You have a day here, a day there, you go up to your cave for a couple of hours, come back down or whatever. There's this constant movement between personal practice and creating these little containers, little retreat experiences, and moving back into ordinary life, bringing your practice to bear on life. A lot of what I do in coaching is actually about how do we do that? And we discuss that a lot in Evolving Ground, like the life affirming path group. That is all about that. It's about how we've got families, we've got busy lives, we've got the universe is busy. How do we bring presence into those relationships? Really, you could say Vajrayana is that. It's about that. The method and the result are all about that. Max, I just want to check in with you.
Yeah.
What was behind your question there?
Well, first, my question was a little bit dramatic, so thank you both for entertaining it. But yeah, it just occurred to me when I thought about the question of scale that the question of scaling in size of a group is one consideration, but another one is just scale in time. Like how long can a group of practice stay around for, and what is the requirement that determines longevity? So if, say, for an effective group of practice to exist, you rely on the presence of at least one person who has like decades of sustained practice, I think in our context here in Vajrayana, that might be a bit different from other communities of practice where, typical contemporary Western circumstances could arise in something like mastery. So, let's say the kind of mastery that one gets through academic work or on the job training, that sort of thing. That's far different from the kinds of mastery that one would achieve by like setting aside time from their life totally to do nothing but practice. So for like I'm going to go on a retreat with Evolving Ground for like a week in a few months, and even that is like for like a lot of the people that we know, like forget about that, forget about taking a week away from work and family and all of those things. And so just thinking about the kind of set aside practice like that's required to produce the sort of a person with the kind of mastery that this sort of community relies upon. I'm thinking about just how that works logistically.
Well, what do you think?
I think the way that it seems to work right now is that we do rely on a kind of cultural transplant. So people going and working in systems that seem to be based somewhat on older cultures or cultures that are not Western, where you do have people who just go and, meditate in a cave for months to years. But that also, this kind of community, there are enough, even our contemporary Western culture is wide enough that you're going to be able to find people who have extraordinary circumstances to some degree that allows them to do that kind of dedicated practice. And that might be enough to
to sustain that requirement for this sort of community.
So I want to pick up on this idea of dedicating many hours outside of ordinary circumstances, life circumstances, work, or whatever. It is important. And like, you know, if you want to learn an instrument, I'm just talking in terms of time now, there's got to be the enthusiasm, the motivation, the discipline, the sense of enjoyment, all of those things come together over years, again and again and again. You know, you're going there, you're doing that because you love it, because you want to do that thing. And at the same time, you don't stop your job. You don't, you know, maybe you do if you want to become a musician, a full-time musician at some point, but there are some awesome musicians who are keeping work going, or who have families and are there with their families. And so I want to kind of nudge a little bit that idea that these things have to be separate. They are distinct, and they relate, and they do not have to be completely separate. It's not like, oh, there's a path, and in order to get that kind of mastery, I have to go off down that path, and this path then becomes totally unavailable. I mean, of course, there's opportunity cost in any choice, and yet the nature of what we're doing, the nature of changing how you are, is relevant in every circumstance.
I think that's a key point in Vajrayana, actually, is that in distinction to many or most spiritual paths, which see the spiritual world as separate from the everyday world, the insistence in Vajrayana is that they are the same. So even if you do go and sit in a cave, that is an artificial thing, which is actually, in a way, a kind of second-class substitute for the practice in the course of raising a family, doing economic work, and so on. If you can do that latter thing, then you know, sitting in a cave is actually second best. The sitting in a cave is is very helpful for getting clear about some things, but it's never the actual point.
It's never the point. So it's like a sandbox, it's a container. And we use that term for group experiences as well. So those could be an hour on a Saturday morning, or like you said, they could be a week retreat in the mountains. But the principle is the same. Their sandbox, their method, in order to, like David said, I like that, see something clearly, in order to have a particular kind of experience. And then a lot of the work is, or play is, how does this become available in different circumstances? And that gets back to the discussion about transmission and about the very traditional kinds of relationships that you have in spiritual context, where there is an incentive to keep the experience contained in the relationship, in the moment, in the you know, the circumstances in which the different experience can become available. And the reason for that is historical. Actually, I think the reason is probably that, you know, there was a family, cultural elite family lineage, and it was important to have the specialness be in one location, be in one area of society. You know, it was a social control mechanism, social order mechanism. Structures grew, this is, you know, speculation, but structures would have grown in order to maintain that kind of social stability. And you don't need the hoi polloi and the, Yeah, the peasants, you don't want the peasants to be having spontaneous realization. That's going to put a freaking spanner in the works, isn't it? You know, it's going to upload the apple cart or whatever. So Marie
has her hand up.
Sorry, Marie, I didn't see your.
Yeah, I just in Max's question regarding like, well, how much time do you need to like spend in retreat to get some level of mastery and be able to teach and all that? But it just brings to mind the question of like the screaming need in our times to have better systems of training, more effective, you know, reducing the amount of kind of wasted effort. And think of Shinzen Young's comment of, you know, when you can't be disciplined, be smart. You know, work smarter. And I don't know, in the times we're in, given, I just think, anyway, I'm grateful for this community. What that has an emphasis on, you know, what's a good way to train. So,
what do you think is like? What are some of the best ways that you've come across?
Distilling principles of practice from the different kinds of practice, distilling the principles and saying, you know, what principles do I need to work on? You know, yeah, like somatic training versus you know, doing some imaginal work versus
Right.
Versus sitting practice, versus you know, some of the compassion practices and relational practice. So
Yeah, you're reminding me how important it is that personality and circumstances are all a part of this. We were talking earlier about not having one individual group, you know, everybody going along the same path, and that's because individuality, personality actually is part of the path, part of the learning experience in Vajrayana, and is necessary in contemporary society as well.
and also the importance of a feedback loop with you know, with your mentor and with your community, you know, just bringing your stuckness to your mentor, to your community. Say, okay, you know, you're stuck, do something else, try something else. That's something you know, I feel like in my own path I wasted too many years being stuck, not really knowing it. Yeah.
We were talking yesterday actually about intervention in practice, like being willing to take your own lead in terms of how you are with your practice, like seeing where you are and being constantly like willing to notice what is stale, what is a rut, what is not functional anymore, and be willing to intervene in that. You know, it takes quite a lot of courage to do that, rather than to sit and, okay, I'm on stage one now, so I'll just wait until I have all the signs that, you know, stage one is done.
Done 100,000 of this,
yeah.
and now it's time to go on to stage 2. Then I can do
That's where
100,000 of that, and I get to stage 3.
Yeah, that's where I like bringing in the STEM training, this engineering kind of mentality of training better. Anyway, thanks.
I think also with the analogy in STEM training that, well, there's lots of interesting analogies. I mean, there's Stack Overflow, which is kind of analogous to the EG Discord. And that's, you know, a radical accelerant for learning technical stuff. But also there's this sense that you can have a panoramic overview of what is possible. And even if you are not expert in some area, you've got a sense of what that is. And so when that thing becomes relevant to where you're at and what you're trying to do, you can say, oh, yes, I need to learn about relational databases, or, oh, yes, it kind of feels like the right practice for me now would be should. And then you can check in with your mentor or your community and say, hey, this is where I'm at. And is it right that should is probably the right thing for me? And how do I get started? And then you get started and you've got some issues that need debugging, and you can, your issues are not going to be the same as other people's issues necessarily. You can go into a practice lab and, have whatever you're stuck on be specifically debugged there, which is very different than the traditional route in which everybody is kind of told to do the same things in the same order.
So, I'm thinking what we're getting back to here is that, yeah, there are multiple different learning modes. And it's not like there is one that is right and another that is wrong. It's all contextual. And taking charge of where you are at in relation to that is pretty important as well. Like, you would not, so in some traditional circumstances, you might be expected to go immediately into, or quite fast into, a quite intimate, committed kind of relationship. And then there are other circumstances in, say, a more collective space where you can spend a hell of a lot of time moving around between different kinds of practices. Or I'll try this, I'll try that, I'll try another thing out, and not actually really making any change in your way of being. So if you have as a kind of guiding orientation, maybe, am I changing? Is something changing here in what becomes available to me? What are my choices in different circumstances? And one of the things we talk a lot about is emotions, like how do we relate? How is our emotional reactivity in different circumstances? Yeah. Is that changing? Is it habitual? Is it exactly how it was a few years ago? Well, if it is, what you can do about it? How have a look, see what different circumstances, possibilities are available, who is available to help you with that. Yeah, Malcolm.
Yeah. Hi. I am thinking back about the sort of the heading topic of this around learning relationships, and thinking forward to the upcoming Kaleidoscope of Interaction course that's about taking Vajrayana into every relationship. And one thing that has been very powerful for me is a practice, a spiritual experience or something that I could describe as something like relating to everybody as Buddha, as a spiritual teacher, and cultivating that view has been very powerful for me. Partially, somewhat cultivating it intentionally, and then also having some experiences of insight where I realized the extent to which that was true and how to orient to that in a way that would be healthy for me. I guess I'm interested in kind of, yeah, some dimension of that. Like, what orientation does a person need to have in order to experience somebody else, whether that's a coach or their brother or their kid, as how to experience that as a learning relationship? Like, what kind of orientation yeah, how would you speak to what kind of orientation you need to bring in order for that to be what it is? Because of course, just calling a relationship learning or coach or whatever doesn't do that.
So picking up on this particular practice, it has a name in traditional Vajrayana. It's called a practice of pure view or pure vision. You might hear it mentioned as. And so a little bit of context. In a traditional context, in Sangha, which is the community of Buddhist practitioners, every Sangha member would always, all the time, adopt or enter into a view that is a pure view of everybody else in those circumstances. Now you can imagine that, of course, that has risks, pitfalls, dangers, and all of the grisly and horrible ways that can and has gone nastily wrong. So in your question, Malcolm, I am reading, and tell me if this is true to where you're coming from, that there are risks in that, and yet it can be an incredibly powerful experience. So what do we do with making that available and mitigating for risks? Is that something like
Yeah, I would say that's very much my question, and I think that part of it is that those risks are seem to me to be just as present, or at least I don't know how to measure it, but those risks are also present in the same way, whether you're orienting to a very realized practitioner as Buddha, or whether you're orienting to, the guy you're talking to at the bus stop as practitioner, like both, or as Buddha, like both of those have a risk depending on how you do that viewing.
Yeah, I think that's right. And one of the ways that we're working with that, thinking about that, is to have quite specified, clear, bounded opportunities to practice that. So instead of it being a generalized, oh, this is always the view, this is always the way that as a practitioner, I want to engage with other people, or I should engage with other people. Instead of that, having, oh, here's a retreat circumstance. For the duration of this retreat, we are all going to intentionally enter into a particular way of being in relation to each other that is characterized by utter regard and assumption that the other person is simply doing their best in this circumstance, that they are being the best possible self, and that they are inherently, fundamentally okay, that every single person in this circumstance is always already totally all right. They're good. Now that's a very, very different assumption than, for example, a Christian metaphysics or framework or understanding of what an individual is. There's another view that could say, well, we're fundamentally sinners, we're fundamentally bad people, we've got to do something about that. That is not the Vajrayana framework at all. And yet we have different contemporary cultural circumstances where there are all sorts of different influences like that informing how we are as people in the world, informing how other people are assuming we are when we're in relation with them as well. So yeah, to have these time-boxed, sandboxed projects or retreats or gatherings in which it becomes possible to just try that out and say, what is it actually like to be in a circumstance with a small group of people who are just assuming that I'm okay, and that everybody here is okay, and that we're not out to get each other, or we're not we're going to be making mistakes, we're going to be human, and that's okay, and we'll simply do our best. So yeah, we've been thinking about it in those terms.
I also wanted to say, one of the nice, this can be a very specific, deliberate practice of seeing others in a certain way. And I think, largely this is great because it creates the opportunity for you to see people and appreciate them, right? Another great thing about the practice itself, and as you kind of get familiarity, like the seated formal practice, I think one of the ways that I've often characterized it is like you're kind of like developing a palate for certain experiential qualities that often can be overlooked. And and those qualities, I like to call them natural. Like when people are being natural, they tend to be effortlessly appreciative and passionate and open and creative. And so this is another thing that's so great, is that you could have no intention whatsoever to be seeing people as kind of inherently perfect in some strange way, and yet that is the result of your practice, is that you all of a sudden find yourself seeing and learning from people that you never would have maybe taken a second glance at before. So it's both, this can be both a formal deliberate thing. It also can be a spontaneous emergent thing that happens naturally in some sense as well, which for me this was like, this is what Vajrayana for me was like. That's what it was all about, is oh my God, I just enjoy people so much now. I can't believe how much I enjoy people. A lifelong narcissist, finally being able to enjoy somebody other than myself. Oh, what a relief.
So you have a retreat coming up where you're going to be practicing this together. Maybe you would like to talk a bit about the August retreat and what that's going to be like?
That's a good point. So 6th to 10th of August, we're having our community retreat. It's open. Those dates are open to public, and we will be. So we've orchestrated a retreat schedule that is pretty different, I think, to any that I've seen before. We will have relational tantra as an aspect of that. So what Malcolm was talking about there, what we're talking about as an option, an opportunity for people to step into different kind of a view, and a lot of holding safety mechanisms there as well. Opportunities to process at the end of the day, talk to people. So we'll have quite a lot of silent sitting as well. Dzogchen movement, different aspects, different types of practice that people can try out, engage with. What should I say, or what do you want to say, Jared?
Well, one thing I would say, it's our first big retreat. We've done some core community retreat in the past and some informal gatherings with a little bit of sit time, but this one is, especially the first part of it, is actually open to the public. So, it really does feel like a lot of it, the function of it is to kind of get a real sense of the vibe of Evolving Ground and its practices and the view, and to actually feel, have it in an embodied way. And on retreat, there's, that's the quickest way to kind of step into it. I think online, being predominantly online, it usually takes quite a bit of time and dedication for people showing up and reaching out to people and interacting on the Discord or something, which often can be very unnatural too, especially for practitioners that have mostly done things in person. So it feels like a really great opportunity for people to get a quick sense of Evolving Ground, and that wasn't really accessible before.
It's an in-person retreat in Colorado, and let's pop the.
I'll pop it in there.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So there's a sense that, in person you can develop relationships and get a sense of the vibe and learn potentially much faster than is feasible online. And Evolving Ground started as a purely online community. In fact, Jared and Charlie hadn't met each other in person
for
for
2 years.
yeah,
At least 2 years, yeah.
A year after starting EG, we met for the first time.
and it's increasingly in person, and I think that that's
It's important.
it's really important, and it's a big step forward. And the this upcoming retreat is at the Drala Retreat Center, which is at 7,000-ish feet in the mountains in August. Stunning place. I was there for a retreat in must have been about 2000. No, earlier than that. Sorry, it must have been about
earlier than
yeah,
that.
so it
A
would have
lot
been
earlier. Well, sorry, not a lot earlier. A little bit.
I don't remember when it was. It's
Yeah.
one of my favorite places on earth. It's just sort of ludicrously sacred and magical.
Yeah. So maybe it's worth saying something about the in-person and the relationship between the in-person gathering group situations and online gatherings as well. It seems to make a lot of difference to meet people in person and then be able to interact online as well. And I think a lot more is possible in Zoom rooms than I would ever in a million years have imagined. I mean, it's extraordinary how much is possible in video as well. But it's lovely that we are moving into that phase of having many more local opportunities. Got groups in Europe now, and different in-person possibilities. That seems pretty important.
Yeah,
California in the fall too, right?
Oh, of course, yeah. We've got a whole series of in-person events coming up in late October, early November in the Bay Area, Sonoma. Yeah,
it's interesting, this perennial theme we keep coming up on of not wanting to make these poles separate in some way, or making them distinct, and so much of that is like how amazing it is when the two poles are actually in relationship and working together. And I really do think that, like in this instance, in person and virtual, if you just show up to in-person stuff, there's a lot that would be missed. And the amount of kind of like the backbone that it creates, the fluency, the familiarity with how to relate to people, familiarity with language, familiarity with the way that we talk about practice and explore together and everything like that really sets an unbelievable foundation for the in-person stuff to just immediately take off, which was really surprising when we first started meeting up in person. I've done I've done a handful of other retreats with people that I hadn't, I was meeting for the first time and didn't have any virtual thing, and it took quite a bit to get comfortable. There's a strange familiarity that I've been pleasantly surprised to run into over and over again at our in-person stuff.
I think it's worth picking up on this in relation to community norms as well. We have community norms that are the same online as in person, and they're very intentional. We spent a lot of time. We have the Vajra community monthly gathering, which these came out of, and they're kind of just basically based in kindness and awareness. Like, I'm influenced a lot by Nachan Rinpoche, Khandra Dechan Rinpoche, and they have this lovely little phrase at the beginning of every retreat. I remember them saying, the only rule is kindness, the only rule is awareness. And like, one would say one would say the other. And it's just really delightful. And what does that actually mean as you bring that into practice? Well, we've had a lot of discussion about what does it mean to be kind, to how do you do that, and it's still ongoing. I mean, it's an art, and we have on the website some pages that came out of that. So there are pages that initially were created for communication in a digital space, and specifically the Discord, and they apply to in-person events as well. So there's curious skepticism, expressing doubt. What's the other one? Jared always has to fill in the third one for me. You're muted.
Oops. Curious skepticism, skillful disagreement, and expressing doubt.
Skillful disagreement, so that actually seriously respecting difference, not just paying lip service to it, but really respecting difference and learning. I mean, that's a skill, learning how to do that. Excuse me.
No, we're at our time, our 90-minute time that we had scheduled. I'm thinking maybe this feels like a good time to stop the recording, and if anybody else wants, if people want to stick around for a bit, maybe we can do a little bit more off the books exploration. Anything else you wanted to put in before we stop recording, Charlie, David?
Something. Say something profound.
Oh dear. I think maybe we can be more informal and just take questions if there are any, and hang around and be silly. I'm pretty good at being silly. I'm not so good at being profound.
What's the difference?
That's a very silly question and also a very profound one.